Hello everyone, this is Ali Reza. Welcome to the Mentor Code Lab. Let's talk about our properties that belong to the block entity itself. In previous episodes, we talked about the properties that belonged to a block. But here we are talking about properties that belong to a block entity class itself. So each block entity has a reference for itself. And as you see, here is a change that I had to do to handle everything. And that is to make our instances of block entities generic. And because we made it generic, now instead of unknown type, we can ask for that type directly here. That's the change that I had to continue and do it on all of the extensions of this base class. So you see that in every one of them, I'm asking for t extends the same thing. However, when it comes to the ones that have a screen, I did change it from directly using block post payload to have a generic of any type as the data payload for that screen opening data. So now, for example, if at any time I want to have a class, I can't do it here. If I want to have a new class, let's call it test, that is a block entity, I can extend it from, for example, updatable and tick BE. However, now I need to produce two things. The first thing is the type of this class. Well, it's test, okay? And the second thing is the payload. So it's block pose payload, and that's it. Now, if I implement methods, you see that the get a screen by default returns the block pose payload. And of course, the rest are just the stuff. Now, one more thing, let's create the constructor. It already understands that we want a block entity type of test, and we are using it there. So that's being that, of course, if we have a mod initializer for block entities, we may want to remove it, and then we would say that a mod block entities dot test BE, for example. And test BE here is a block entity type of test, and we already registered like that. So if I have the no screen updatable BE, then I have to provide the test as the type. And again, if I implement the methods, you see that we have the register field. That's okay. Wait a minute. It accepts the type for the fields, and then tick and tick client. And I will talk about this in a few minutes. Don't worry. It's an addition into our class that you didn't see before. Now, the other one is create the constructor. You see that again, it's aware of its own type. So it's not unknown type anymore. And that's the beauty of using these generics at the end. However, you notice that we have this register fields. Now, we'll come back to this block entity fields because that's an addition to the block entity properties, as you can see. And each one of the block entities will be responsible of registering their own fields to the block entity. Each block entity will have a reference for itself. That's self-explanatory. Then we have a tick rate. It means that should we tick every tick, or maybe we want a block entity that ticks only 2 times a second, every 10 ticks, or maybe once a second, nothing beyond that. The way we had implemented block entities in vanilla or in many more tutorials is that the block entity will tick 20 times per second, and there is no way around it. However, now we can handle it thanks to what 30 had produced for us. Then this is an interesting one. Instead of putting our logic for the tick inside the onTick method as a whole, he is producing a tick logic as a class. And this class is responsible of keeping in mind what is the logic. So at each tick, if we should tick, we find this tick logic and check if it's not null. If there is a tick logic, then we will tick it and execute the logic on that tick logic. That's the whole thing. Now, we have fields for each block entity. We will take a look at this in a few minutes. Don't worry. Of course, we have a constructor that accepts a block entity, and we assign the block entity, and we call the register fields on that block entity. And this is why we had added that register fields onto our no screen BE at the end, because every one of these block entities are extensions of this no screen updatable BE. So we call the register fields and we get done with it. Then we can assign the tick rate if we want to. If the tick rate is less than 0, we can't have a negative number. Then we throw an illegal argument exception. Otherwise, we assign the tick rate, and like before, we return ourselves so that we can chain the command. The next one is to assign the tick logic. Now, tick logic has a builder, and all we are doing is call the build and get the tick logic and assign it to itself. And that would be it. However, the one that 3040 has if I can find it. As you see, it has these wrapper inventories and then produce 4 different methods for those inventories. Now, I talked about this situation at some video before. At the base structure, we don't want any inventories. Okay, so these are not being produced here. The last things that we need to take a look is the tick logic and block entity fields. Let's take a look at block entity fields. Well, we are aware of the type of the block entity and the block entity itself. All it is doing is a map of a string with a block entity field. Yes, we can add a field in different ways, and if you look, this one has a name and default value. This one has a getter and setter for the field, and these two are just two interfaces. One has a get method, one has a set method, and we are assigning the field and we're putting it to the map, and then we return ourselves. We check if we contain a field, we get the field with the name and the type. You can stop the video and read the code. It's basically self-explanatory, isn't it? We get the field from the map. If it's null, then we check the type. If the type is correct, we return it, okay? And this is what is missing actually here, is what missing from the block properties BE when I said the type was not using in that video. I may add it myself. I leave it as it is for time being. Then we have the get field value. Well, we get the field and then we read the value for the block entity. Then we get the field as integer. You see that this is how we use class type. We read ourselves, we give the name, we give the block entity, and then we say that, hey, we want a field that is integer or long or float or double or boolean or string, okay? And then we have something for setting the field. Again, we have this class type. And again, we are saying that, hey, set a field with this name on this block property with this value, but the value type is integer or long or float or double or boolean or string. And that's the whole thing about block entity fields. Let's take a look at block entity field, because that was a list of this guy. Now, block entity field is just simple. It's a default value, a getter, and a setter. And we can create it using the default value with no getter or setter. We can get the default value, we can get the getter, we can get the setter. So we can get the value for the block entity, or we can set the value for the block entity. Now, as you saw, we can set null to these, and I didn't provide any one-way constructors, but if you want to, you can provide them. Let's do it. Let's have something that has only a getter. So this.set equals, actually we call ourself. So instead of null, here is the getter, and we may have something that we can only set. I don't know why you would set something but you don't read it, but let's provide it. So here I will call myself, I will add null as the getter, but I will send in the set, and that's it. So I added 2 overloads to what 30 had, as simple as that. This is the block entity field. Now, getter is an interface that just has the get method that returns a value for a block entity. Setter is an interface that sets a value for a block entity. Nothing too complex there. Now, the last thing that we didn't look in here is the tick logic. Tick logic is interesting, and I want to cover it in another video, actually in the very next video, because as you see, it's producing many instances of a record, and it has a class called builder. And builders are something that we didn't cover in this channel, although there are some tutorials out there, but I want to dive into it at least as much as it was implemented inside tick logic, and this needs its own video. So I will talk about it in its own video right after this one. If you like these videos, please subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and turn on that bell so that when I publish a new video, you will get informed. Have fun, everyone. Bye.